Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Death by Writing. I'm your host, Jacob, and this is my co host, Slater.
Hello.
And today we're going to be talking about what got us into horror, pretty much.
hmm
Before we dive too deep into that, though, anything cool happened to you this last week?
Not a terrible amount. I gotta say, I've been a little bit lazy in the last week. I get tied up with a lot of things pretty easily. Um, so yeah, I'm mostly just focusing on life event stuff. So I have to kind of take a break from writing once in a while, just so I can focus on my family. When I'm
Makes
not
sense.
doing that, I end up coming back to writing for a little bit. So I just kind of go in and out. At the moment, I'm trying to finish up Janie. I have about 20,000 words left to write before I get to the 50,000 word mark. And I'll just kind of take it from there. Whether or not it goes past that is fine with me.
And are you still trying to release that in March?
I'm trying to finish writing that in March, or by March. I'd like to
Okay.
get it done because March is a very busy month for me. Whereas I have two kids' birthdays in the same month, and I know
Damn.
that setting that shit up is going to really um, dilute a lot of my projects. Um, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to finish it by March, and at that point I'll be sending stuff out to my editor whenever she's ready for my new manuscript.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm just editing everything. My goal is to get out every book. I think I've talked about this. Every book that I've just kind of have saved on a hard drive that's done,
Mm-hmm.
just to put it out this year.
That's right. You said
Uh,
that. Uh, yeah, I've been reading the book I mentioned in the last episode. I have been reading a little bit of the Breakout Novelist. A lot of good information in it. Unfortunately, I see a lot of information about people who are traditionally publishing. That would be kind of my dream gig. Would be to traditionally publish, because in my mind, whether or not it's true, in my mind, it tells me that someone liked my work enough to contract me, or something to that effect.
I mean, you could always look at some of the smaller presses because there's a couple that I plan on submitting stuff to this year.
Mm-hmm.
Just because, and it's not because it's not one of those things where like big five publishers people think they're going to get like $1 million. It's more along the lines of I really like the stuff they're putting out.
Mm-hmm.
It's quality stuff and it's in my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
Um, so, but that's more of an addition to what I'm already doing. So I guess that would be more of like a hybrid thing I'm going for
Mm-hmm. That's cool.
because I wouldn't, if they did decide to publish something that I sent to them, and maybe do more work with them, that'd be really cool. But I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't stop self-publishing either.
Yeah. No, I'm still I the thing I like about self publishing so much, and there's gonna be a lot of disagreements with me on this one, but I feel like it's a lot easier in a couple of senses. One way is, whenever a change needs to be made, you can just get it done that same day, and in a couple of days it updates and it's all done. Another way is you're constantly in control. I'm kind of a control freak, anyways. So you always know, where your sales are at, what you need to work on, and then you can analyze what your tactics are. So, did I fuck this up because it went down, and this is what I did different from last time, or the other side of that spectrum, which is, well, I did this, and that got a really good response. The thing that made a lot of sales, I think, is I did a whole promo thing where if you bought a copy of my book and take a selfie with it, I post it straight to my authors page on Facebook. Um, and a lot of people get excited because they're like, "Oh, that's cool." We live in an got a little bit, myself included. We live in a little bit of a narcissistic environment, and what better way to show off, what you've got and whatever you're doing than to promote my work, and that's fine with me, and everybody wins. Uh,
Yeah, and I hear that amongst a lot of people who are traditionally published, it's just that the you as a self-published author can market your stuff a lot better than most of the bigger traditionally published companies can, especially if they handle a large variety of different genres instead of just the genre you write in.
right.
Um, but they're also not giving out the contracts like they used to that make it super lucrative to try to chase down traditional publishing in today's
Exactly.
market.
Yeah. Um, yeah, there's a couple of different people out there who did really well by self-publishing. So I'm just kind of like picking up on a couple of things that other successful people have done and trying to implement them into what I'm doing currently.
Yeah.
Because if they're doing something and I know their name, they're doing something right.
Yeah. Well, another thing I've been looking into recently is screenwriting.
Mm-hmm. Screenwriting
And
is pretty fun.
it is fun. I really like it. I love reading scripts. I've read scripts for a long time, expect like for movies that I like.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to see what translates directly from the script to the screen because there's usually multiple versions of the script before they get to the final script.
Right.
Um, but the thing that amazes me with screenwriting is it's always Hollywood's always portrayed as script hungry,
Mm-hmm.
but it seems impossible. Like if you even just spend an hour on the internet trying to get like any type of contact information for a screenwriting agent or a manager,
Mm-hmm.
it's really hard to do. Most of them just list addresses.
Right.
It's real. It's like an interesting. So I think what it is it makes me realize probably because I imagine that the today's screenwriting market would have been the same loops I would have to jump through to try to get a screenplay into somebody's hands now would be the same thing I would have had to do in the 80s or 90s trying to get someone to look at my novel.
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
And it's crazy to me because I look at this, and every time I do it every now and again because I've written some scripts, and I'm just like, why can't I just self-publish these? Is that a thing? Can I just self-publish scripts? Do people read them that way?
Yeah, I've never even heard of that, but that might be a pretty cool idea. I'd probably mention. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of legal stuff that would go on, but I'm more focused on people reading my stuff than I am actually like on my sales. So obviously, that's not a great business technique, especially since I don't even have a fucking website up right now. So my focus mainly and mostly is just having like I wrote this story, and even when I was a kid, whenever I wrote something, I show someone this. I'm proud of this thing, and that's initially what got me into writing. First off, because you get to create this whole thing from inside your brain and turn it into something physical for other people to also visit, and it's just kind of there's something magical about that, and so I kind of go to my roots with that kind of thing. And kind of go to a mind where I'm like, well, I wrote this thing and I kind of want someone to check it out. I mean, obviously, I need to work more on my business end. But you know what? The cool thing about keeping an open mind in this kind of business is you're always going to be able to learn new things and pick up new tactics, and especially the more you go to events or talk to other people like yourself or other writers or whatever.
Yeah, and I want to point out because it kind of came up this week when we were placing stories over at Serial Pulp magazine. I'm one of the editors over there. We were placing stories for our 5th issue, and we were talking about a writer who basically, and I'm not going to say their name or anything, but and it just kind of reminded me of the fact that to be successful in this industry or any other industry, you really have to be open to things. Absolutely. But at the same time, and the biggest thing I hear about people when they talk about other writers, especially amongst editors, is how easy to work with they are. And basically what it came down to is this writer was not easy to work with. They stood to make a decent amount of money. Because what they were doing, it was like a novel and a whole bunch of stuff. It they weren't easy to work with, and once it gets to that point, the editors, it's easier just to drop you than it is to continue working with you. And the problem is, too, is that you never know who other people know. Does that make sense? So I'm not as tapped in to the, I'm a little tapped in, I guess, to the horror community, maybe, but not to anyone that matters, I don't think. But now some of the other editors I work with have been in this business for years and years and years. So the minute that writer's name comes up amongst some of their peers, they're going to say, oh, man, that guy, he was hard to work with. And it kind of made me think when I was on the call, I was like, I wonder how many careers have been ended just by that sentence.
That's a really good thing to ponder, actually. My editor had to keep telling me, oh, no, it's fine, Joe. Stop apologizing. So I think that's... I kept, every time I made a request on something or asked her a question, I was like, oh my God, I really need you to edit this, and I really want you to know how much I appreciate your work. And, every time I talked to her in between edits, I felt like I was bothering her. But the sign of a good editor, that can be the other way around too, where a writer will be like, you know what, I would stay away from that editor because they're kind of a dick about it. Like, they're not just changing your stuff, they're like, they just straight up, the first editor I went to, he pissed me off pretty bad because, we as writers pour everything we have in ourselves, and they're in a way, when you write a book, it's kind of like a horcrux of your soul. And when an editor just shits all over it with complete callous towards the work you put into it, it's really easy for you to go to other writers and say, well, stay away from this editor, this guy was a dick to me. And sometimes you might deserve it. Some people do. But I went to my other editor, the current one I've got, and she reassured me that no, there's no way that guy should have said that. This is great work. So
yeah, so I've noticed, and I noticed it too when I was in college. There's a lot of people who think that editing means they're like the gatekeepers for what type of story should be consumed. And if it's something they don't like, instead of just going, even if it's a strong story but it's not their genre, they would rather tear down the story and the genre at the same time. You know what I mean? And there really is a way, I think, to tell people that things don't work. Because I know, like I said, when I'm working with other writers and I'm editing their stuff, and maybe it's because I come from this as a writer myself. I know that I don't want someone just to shit all over my story. I want them to tell me, hey, the story was entertaining, but, this character, Hank, I fucking hated that guy. Yeah. He didn't make any sense. His dialogue stilted. I know you just threw him in there for a plot point. But I also know by reading your story that you're a brilliant fucking writer. So you can come at this another way, and you don't need, Hank, the guy pumping gas, to tell the don't go to the cabin this weekend, kids. It's haunted. You don't need that in there. Or whatever. Right. That's an example, but whatever stupidity.
No, I definitely see it that way. When somebody, I've mentioned this in a previous episode, I've been beta reading for another author. And
that's always so stressful.
It's so stressful because this is why I would be a shitty editor. For starters, I don't want someone to be paying me a lot of money to edit something, and then they find an edit that I missed.
Oh, you don't have to worry. Editors don't get paid a lot of money.
All right. The other... Oh, thank God. Yeah.
No, you were worried there for a minute.
Mine got paid pretty good, but, whatever.
Yeah.
Oh, where was that? Oh, yeah, so... I said it before, the curse that comes with the honor of beta reading is having to tell another writer what they should change. because I know how much work goes into that shit. So when you're like, so I was very delicate when I sent an email with my review. It was a very long review, mostly because I didn't want to come across as some crusty asshole. Like, I just wanted to be like, I genuinely did enjoy it. You had a great premise. The only thing I would change is this and this. Maybe a couple of these things. But definitely you're in the right direction. And I just try to be the guy that I want to have look at my stuff. And so that's what I think a lot of people need to keep in mind when they work on other people's stuff is, be the guy that you want to talk to you. That golden rule takes you pretty goddamn far sometimes.
Well, and I think it's also hard too, when a lot of people have so many different beta readers. Like I've heard of authors that have 20 or 30 beta readers on a novel. Yeah, and I'm like, you can't have that many voices in your head before you put a book out or whatever you're working on. Yeah.
Yeah, I would. Like, yeah, I'm only probably going to go with like 5, maybe.
If I had, I'll be honest, I don't even really like using beta readers, because it's just that thing where I don't know if they're telling me what I want to hear, and then sometimes it's also the flip side of that, of if they don't like something but another beta reader does like it, what do I do then? Does it not work for the story?
I think
was it just not?
Own opinion kind of has to come into play. Like, ultimately, it's your project.
Yeah.
And if someone says, "I hate that you killed this guy," and the other one says, "I love that you killed this guy," and what you have to come to the decision of is, well, what is it about the story that progressed because you killed him? And
well, and that's always what it's going to be around too. Is going to be the sex, the violence, the cursing,
the sexy werewolves.
Because it's always that stuff that they that gets nitpicked, and it just goes back to, do they not like it, or is there something else about it? Is it polarizing to them? Does if other people like it, what do you do at that point? Because obviously, as creators, you can't please everyone, and I think you would just go crazy trying to. Wow, we went way off topic here.
Chat. I think it's a really good topic to go over, and I think it's fair. I like that.
Yeah.
Original topic being, how we originally started out. I think you've mentioned it blips and pieces before, but I'm really curious, what got you ultimately into horror? Because I know that when I met you in Basic, you at that point you had already gotten really into like spooky creepies. So I don't know.
Yeah, I grew up in the Goosebumps era. So I was watching, after school in the afternoons, I was watching Goosebumps. I was watching Are You Afraid of the Dark? I was watching Eerie, Indiana. What was that other show on Disney? So Weird, about the girl and her friends. Her mom was like a rock star, and they were always running across paranormal encounters.
I remember.
It's called So Weird.
Blake Halsey High.
I watched Blake Halsey High. I was watching. I used to watch the X-Files with my parents. I used to watch. Animorphs was scary. I remember that one. And then there was what was the other one? It was the one about the girl that could turn into like liquid for some odd fucking reason.
I would not get.
It was on Nickelodeon. It came on.
I didn't watch a lot of Nickelodeon, so that's kind of why I'm a little out of the loop. If it was on PBS, that's why.
Yeah, it used. Yeah, PBS has some good stuff too back in the day. But yeah, it came on after all that, or maybe it came on before all that. But then you had Kenan and Kel versus the Headless Horseman. So I think I grew up in a good time, not only for horror, because it was still that 90s funnel. I was born in 93. So I was watching this stuff in 97, 98, all the way up to the early 2000s. I remember a lot of, this was the time when Disney was putting out a lot of the horror movies for kids. So it was really being marketed towards us. There was, what was it? There was the Goosebumps books. There was the Fear Street books. Christopher Pike had the Spooksville series out. There was a lot of, now I guess it would be called YA, but it was almost, but it wasn't the YA we have now, because the YA now is more almost adult. I mean, people still died. There wasn't a whole lot of romance. Usually, if there was, it never went farther than kissing. But I remember it being a big thing. People, especially like my older cousins and stuff, they would collect these series, and it was a big thing when Scholastics came around, and you got all these books. There was another kind of kids book series, and I almost forgotten about it. And then I saw it the other day. I think it was called Spine Tinglers. And it was like, yeah, this is it. Spine Tinglers. Their covers used to freak me out when I was a kid. And so one of the biggest things that got me into reading is I wanted to be able to read these books.
Nice.
When I'd go to the library, and it was the same thing when I'd go to video stores. If anyone listening's old enough to remember video stores, I would look at the covers of these movies, and I would imagine what the movie would be like based on the covers. And that's what I did for books too. Now, it was easier for me to, obviously get books from the library than it was to convince my mom to let me read, to let me check out, rated R movies. Shivers, that was the one. Anyway, there was one by M.D. Spencer in the Shivers series called Babyface and the Killer Mob, and I remember that was one of the first books I read, and it used to freak me out because on the cover was it's like a skeleton crawling out of a car, and there's like, bullet holes and stuff everywhere. And I remember it used to scare me so much I couldn't look at the book cover when I was reading the book.
What was that book called?
It's Shivers is the series, and it's Babyface and the Killer Mob by M.D. Spencer.
I'm just looking it up right now.
So it's one of those things that I'm sure, it was like a 90s Goosebumps knockoff. So I'm sure it's probably not actually that scary at this point. Yeah, that's something I've actually been doing kind of lately, is I've been going back and buying, whenever I see them at thrift stores or anything like that, some of these books from my childhood. I don't know if you can see the stuff behind me, but I kind of have like...
You have like a used bookstore behind you.
Well, no, the top shelf is all like
I see that, that's cool.
Yeah, so, I don't know. It's getting there. And it's kind of cool, too, because I've also realized that Goosebumps is re-releasing all the old series, I guess, from back in the day. So they're getting easier to get. I think it's like $30, and you get like the first 20 books or something.
That's kind of neat.
Yeah. And I've also, I don't know if you've heard of Book Outlet.
I have.
Yeah, I recently just got into them, and I've already bought a lot of stuff
you were
from there.
talking about that on the last episode, where you just went through and you found a bunch of shit for like $4 each. $2 to $4.
Yeah, I mean they sell books for like 99 cents. So I have found out that I have a serious addiction to buying books, and I have to get people to stop me. I was at a flea market the other day, and I don't read Star Trek novels. I like Star Trek. I don't read Star Trek novels, though. A lot of the tie-in novels, it's just, I don't know, there's always some disconnect. And I find this with a lot of TV tie-in novels. I just can never get into them. minus the Buffy the Vampire Slayer ones, but I think that's only because I'm such a fan of the Angel and Spike stuff.
So
that it is what it is.
So yeah, you started off with like the Goosebumps era, and that probably brought you down to about middle school. That stuff started to phase out a little bit. But at what point did you start writing your first scary stuff?
I wrote and it was trash.
Of course it was.
Too, by the way,
when we were teenagers, and they should never see the light of day again.
It was. No, it wasn't even a teenager writing thing. It was when I was in the first grade. I wrote a story about people turning into werewolves and eating their parents. And I got in a little bit of trouble for it because it was violent. And that was always the weird thing too. It was, that was something that, like, from that era, or maybe it's just because I lived in a small town, but the schools would let you buy books about monsters, but the minute you were really into monsters, it was like, man, there's something wrong with that kid. And I'm like, dude, you sold me these. What are you talking about? You made me buy these. Your library is full of them.
Yeah, but they're kind of like the forbidden fruit without telling you it's forbidden kind of thing.
Exactly. And so basically, you know, I went through that phase, and then I never really ever thought about writing. I knew I was good at it in the way that other kids struggle, and I still have to come to that realization from time to time, because, like, my little brother is stupid smart in math. He's like a fucking human calculator. But you ask him to write a letter or just a brief bio of anything, it doesn't, he can't do it. It'll take him hours and hours. Whereas I'm like the opposite. I can procrastinate to the last 30 minutes when something's, I got to turn something in or whatever, and crank out 3,000 words of bullshit. Is it going to be good? No, but it's going to be passable. And I guess so it's just one of those things where you kind of realize, like, oh, I'm okay with this, but I think it's too, I come from a really blue collar background where that's not a real job. That's not seen as a real thing. And then I was in third grade, a teacher told me, I wrote some story about me and my dad going fishing, and she really liked it. But she also didn't let us have recess that often, so I mean, what did she know? But yeah, and then I always read, but I was more of a fantasy reader for a long time. I was really into the Redwall. After my Goosebumps phase, I was much more into, like, the Redwall books.
Ate those books out.
Yeah, I fucking love those. I just bought some recently. I found some at a Goodwill. Got my old Lord Brock tree. I'm excited to read back through that again. That's one of my favorites.
Mossflower. That one was pretty awesome. That's the one where not Matthias.
That's the story of Martin, right? Was Mossflower Matthias or Martin?
And that's when they had to fight I think it was the Lynx. And this is in chronological order, this was the second book, I think. And no, third. It was the third one. And what they did was they had to they had to go to this castle and stop this Lynx from destroying people. And that's the first time they actually run to the otters. And I remember the otters were like these really chill, laid-back badasses. Like, they were really fun, but they would also fuck you up.
My favorite thing about the otters in all the fucking Redwall books was all the description towards the food. And I think it's why I like to cook.
Goddamn chapters about poppy seeds and honeydew. Holy fuck.
So, but, okay, so the thing is, though, with the otters, is they always make this, like, spicy soup. And it's because of Redwall. Every time I cook soup, and I've done this since I was, like, 8, I put fucking cayenne pepper in it. And it's because of the goddamn otters in Redwall and their spicy-ass soup.
That's awesome.
But I do it all the time, and I have to catch myself doing it because I'm like, all right, I don't need cayenne pepper and fucking this. but I know what it comes from because every time I think about spicy soup, I think of that, and it gets my stomach going. I'm like, ooh,
Nice.
that sounds so good.
Gonna have some otter soup later. I guess.
Yeah, no,
Mhm.
I love those books.
So when do you think you're?
And then
What's that?
So yeah, I said so. I got into them, and then so yeah, I was always reading. I got into Circuit to Freak for a while, which I don't know if I count that so much as horror. I mean, it was gory, but it wasn't. I don't know. It wasn't
Yeah.
scary. You know what I mean? Like it didn't elicit a fear response. It was just. It was like
Yeah.
Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Like that doesn't scare
It's
me,
a
but it
creepy
entertains
element
me.
to it, but it's just it's a creepy element to it, but overall, it's not a scary story.
Yeah, and then I want to say I was like 6th or 7th grade. I think I was 6th. And I found out my buddy's dad really liked reading Stephen King. And I had watched some Stephen King movies in the past, but I had never read his books. I didn't, at this point, I didn't realize that adult books could also be scary. I didn't realize, my family didn't hang out in bookstores. My family is
Yeah.
not a lot of readers. So I didn't realize that there was such a market for horror fiction. But anyway, he gave me a copy of Needful Things,
Ooh,
and that's when I
that's a
really got
good one.
into horror fiction. Yeah. Yeah, and that was the first time a book ever frightened me because I lived in a small town.
And that's like all of Stephen King.
And yeah, and it's all of Stephen King, and also it wasn't the thing that, and I still think Needful Things is scary to this day, is that there wasn't a monster, so to speak. It wasn't
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It wasn't really, it was your next door neighbors
Right.
giving into temptation. Like that was the
Yep.
scary part of the book. Yeah, and it just kind of
Nice.
spiraled from there.
I'd have to think back a little bit. I'd have to think pretty hard on, where my horror influences came from. I think a lot of like my developmental years, it was always sort of there, but never really. I was kind of a skittish, squirrely little kid. I didn't want to disappoint anybody or anything like that because when you upset somebody or you fucked up really bad. I grew up in a very religious environment for a very long time. So everything that you did
Yeah.
was like, you're going to go to hell forever and ever, amen. And like that doesn't fuck a kid up.
Seems pretty legit.
And so I was like really scared of everything. Like if I do that, I'm gonna really fuck up. If I go do this, I'm gonna really fuck. I remember, god damn it, I was like 10 years old, and I asked this girl out, or I told this girl that I liked her at a fucking Bible camp of all places, and she ran to her dad and told her dad, who was a pastor, and then he went to my boss, who I was volunteering at the camp for, and he told me that like I was not a good person, and I'm going to go to hell for that, like all for asking a fucking girl out, and like little shit like that has always been in the back of my head. I mean, seeing like Goosebumps and stuff, like it didn't really interest me at that age. I was more so into like biographies because I wanted to learn about people who made it through tough times and how they did it. Kind of, I was looking for pointers on people older and smarter than me. And what ended up happening was, I hadn't really thought about writing actual horror until my first novel. But I'll get to that in a second. But what it started out as is I remember the first movie ever in the history of my life. The first movie I ever remember watching was Tremors with Kevin Bacon, and
Oh god,
so,
I fucking love that
like
movie.
that movie traumatized me. Like to this day, I refuse to watch it, and I know it's so corny.
good.
But I just can't handle it. It just the fear in their eyes and everything as a kid that fucked me up. And saw little stuff like that. Like, well, if you get out of bed and sneak out to the night, like the fucking boogeyman's gonna get you. Like that's the shit I grew up with. And so, I just kind of was trying to be a good kid. And what ended up happening to me was in middle school, I would, gotta be honest, like I was telling a lot of tall tales because I was from a place where like you're nobody, and I wanted to like make people think I was cool by making stories up. And finally, my seventh grade teacher, one of the ones that I actually dedicated the Vacation Planet to, she came to me and she said, you can get paid to tell stories. And I was just mind fucking blown. Like, what? And I had always been a reader. My first, so I started writing all the time. All the time. Like, I would read a chapter and I would write too. Like, that was every day for me all through middle school and high school. And what my first, I guess you might say, horror book was was by Richard Bachman, which for some of those of you who don't know, that is Stephen King's alter ego, or his other pen name rather. And I was reading The Running Man, and that's my first Stephen King book, is The Running Man. And so I'm digging around these shelves, like I'm like a rat looking for a piece of cheese in the sewers. Like, where the fuck is the next one? I gotta find another one. But I didn't put two and two together that I had read a Stephen King book, and those were everywhere. So eventually I started going to other, to Stephen King. I'm like, yeah, alright, fuck it. I'm hearing good stuff about him. I'll work on it, look at it. And I don't remember which one it was, but it really got me going. I've read so many Stephen King at this point, I don't even remember which is which from at different points. But I remember, like, my epiphany moment for writing, like, fucked up things, and I enjoyed writing something that got a reaction out of people. And up until that point, I was writing fantasy stuff, which is a really good place to start. But I loved watching the reactions on people's faces when they read my story. It's called The Baby Orange, and it's at face value, it's a cute little story, and it's about this little orange, and it's in an orange vineyard or grove or however the fuck groups of oranges are, orchard, and the harvester goes through, and it harvests all this little oranges, friends and families, and some of them like get caught up in the blades and get sliced open, and they're all screaming and begging. Like, if you've ever seen Sausage Party, it was kind of like that. Like, it was like really fucked up, and even now, like, if I looked back at it maybe a year ago, and I was like, Jesus, I had so many problems. And
you were one of those kids my mom always warned me to stay away from.
I was the happy-go-lucky little kid who wrote about murder in his stories. I wore bright. I was. Do you remember? Happy, and I wore bright colors, and I was so happy. And then I would go home and be sad.
Well, so you know what I was thinking about the other day too, and not to cut you off. Do you remember Happy Tree Friends?
They were popular in,
but
I think, high school. Yeah.
Well, okay, you're also a little older than me, but they were. I remember them, late elementary, early middle, and then all the way up. And it's weird to me thinking the way our culture is now that at one point, for a couple years, Happy Tree Friends was mainstream comedy.
It was so
like
gross.
Cute little animals getting brutally
so
murdered.
Some of them are like,
and brutally,
wow, that's fucking disgusting. Because it's just gory.
So there's one where the moose is shaving in the car, and something happens, and he like nicks himself with the razor blade, and he literally, like, blood just shoots everywhere, and it starts gushing everywhere. And I think about that every time I shave, and it freaks me out every fucking time.
Why I have an issue with eyes? Because the same moose,
yeah,
gets
okay,
his eye cut
that
in half
too.
with a blade because it's being cut by whichever one was blind. There was a blind one, and it like ripped his eye out, and it started chopping it up into little pieces, and like it was served as like lemonade because he squeezed half of the eye over a lemonade juicer. And I remember that scene particularly just grossed me the fuck out. But
yep. I think that's because
Yeah,
you're a normal
Flippy's
person.
my favorite though. I think I relate to him somehow. I don't know. He was the one without. He was the crazy one with. He had PTSD attacks. So he kept fucking people up like Rambo. Um, yeah, yeah. Anyways, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember that. Anyway, so yeah, in high school, I was just kind of like a happy-go-lucky kid who wrote fucked up things, and then I didn't come to a realization like I didn't have that aha moment until after at the time about 4 or 5 years of marriage to who I lovingly refer to as the Dementor, and she. I was in a very dark place when I was married to her. I was in a very...
As someone who was one of your beta readers during that time, trust me, I understand.
Yeah, I went through a really dark place, and what people at my job call is Dark Ages Joe. Because it really was. I didn't come into Renaissance Joe until after I left the Army. But I wrote the most fucked up story, and it came up to me it was the one day of the whole year I actually got to sleep in. Because even when I wasn't working, the bitch would wake me up early as fuck for no reason. Anyway, so I had this dream, and it was, it was the first novel I wrote. I wrote it with such intensity because I saw it in my head, in a dream, and it was so real. You were a beta reader for With Wild Abandon. It was my first novel. I haven't published it yet because the reason why I haven't edited and published it is because it is so fucked. The way I describe it is it's like the Goonies, except they die along the way, and it's a serial killer who kills kids with foul play, and it's
I want that novel to come out so bad because I think if people read that, they would understand the rest of your work.
Yeah.
Because that's like you know what I mean? Like Joe puts kids in danger, Slater. like Kids in Danger is how I sum up like most of your fiction. I'm like, oh, it's okay.
Yep.
See what happens this week.
So I'm actually getting to that. It's funny that you're saying that. That's what I'm getting to. So I wrote that in 20 days. I wrote that in 20 days, like 60,000 words, and oh god, I was so motivated then. But I was in such a bad place when I wrote that, and when I wrote the outline for that in my notebook the next morning, I had such a clear vision. Like, I had never had such a clear vision of what I wanted to write in my life. And it was like this, it was early in the morning, and I remember the sun was, it's just like a story in itself. Like, the line was shining on my face through the window as I was writing this thing, like it was a sign from fucking God that I was to write horror and scary and creepy things. And ever since that moment, I just started getting into like creepy stuff. And when my first therapist, she was like a general studies therapist who I was like one of her first 5 patients she had ever seen in her life. And I remember she like had no idea like how to get in my head. I was fucking her up because like I'm not discrediting people who want to be therapists. You guys are stronger than me. I'm just saying that, you know, I was talking to her and she looked at me in just such bewilderment of like, I can't believe that I'm hearing you say this stuff because this is really fucked up. You sound like a prison inmate. And then she asked, and then she's like, "You're such a nice guy. Like you're just such a nice guy. Like why do you write such horrible stuff?" And I said, "Well, even nice guys have nightmares." And she just like sat there like, wow. I'm like, well, it's true. It's the quiet guys you want to watch for. It's what they all say. But I said to her, you know, I want to work on a new book, but I don't know where I want to go. Like, I wrote horror, and my first novel was written in the horror genre, and I'm not sure where to take that. Like, I don't know what direction to go from there. And she says, well, why don't you keep writing about stuff that you're afraid of? And so this is why there's always kids in my story. Don't worry, like the With Wild Abandon is the only one where I mutilate kids, and even then it's not even whatever. Anyway, so the reason why I wrote about that is people misconstrue it for me hating kids. I have 3 kids. I don't hate them. I'm trying for another one right now. Like it's I love having kids, but the issue I'm running into is she told me to write about what I'm afraid of most. And at the time, I had I mean, it's a long story, but because of who I was with at the time, I lost my kids for a year. And that's where my mind was at. Is I was, my youngest was born. She was in the NICU, and I hadn't seen her for 3 years. Like, I didn't see her until she was 3 years old. So, I mean, there's that. And obviously, your brain goes to really bad places. And I said, my biggest fear is something happening to my kids. And so that's kind of why you sometimes have kids in my stories, especially in Janie, which is what I'm working on right now. She's a 12-year-old girl. And the reason why is because my worst fear is something bad happening to my kids. And I connect to that. And I emotionally tie myself into the story. And I feel that if you're emotionally invested in your story, so will your reader. But I guess that's kind of what my story is now. Like, I didn't start listening to like actual metal or anything until that phase of my life where I was transitioning into this dark, wicked, flaming butterfly. Yeah.
See, and that's when I first read your book With Wild Abandon, that's what I took it as too. But I also know you, so maybe that helps. But and to be fair, if you're on the fence about putting it out there because of the whole kid thing, just always remember that Stephen King does worse to kids than it.
Yeah.
Every day, like, worse things happen in that book to children than what happens in yours.
That's true.
Because that is one I really do like. But I'm also a big proponent of if you write it, put it out there type of thing. Which I'm trying to be a hypocrite about at this point, so I got to get all my stuff out there, and then I can kind of like, make a glass of tea when I tell people that. And I think that's one of the reasons that it, when I wrote Float and it started selling really well, I started writing other stuff because I was really worried I was going to be like the shark guy.
I can see that.
But that being said, I've written like a lot of other shark novels because I am so terrified of the ocean and things I can't see in the water.
We have another Lovecraft on our hands, I guess.
Well, so I grew up in the river, along the river and along the Chesapeake Bay. I didn't grow up in the river. I didn't mean to say that.
I understand that, but I'm glad you're clarified now.
But yeah, so, and, most of my family are fishermen. So I was never, like, naive to the fact that bigger things than me swam around me. Like, there's some big shit. And I don't like it. I don't like how big rockfish get. I don't like how big tuna get. It makes me uncomfortable when someone finger fucks a catfish to the surface. I don't like that at all.
Yeah.
I don't. You ever see that thing where people put their fucking feet in the water and let fish eat their toes? Fuck is wrong with them? I don't like it makes me so uncomfortable. Eels scare the shit out of me.
Eels are pretty nasty though.
I got bit by an eel once.
Yeah.
Terrifying. What else? Octopuses, don't like them at all. When I was stationed in Alaska, I saw an octopus run along a beach. They like push themselves up on their tentacles when the tide goes out from whatever rock they're stuck to, and then literally sprint down the beach into the water.
Like, why are they moving so fast?
That gave me more nightmares than any movie I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, I was in a landlocked state, so I had less sea adventures when I was stationed out there. But I did run into a really severe drug epidemic, so there's that. Yeah,
Colorado. Yeah. Oh, I saw whales. I was on a boat fishing up in outside of Seward, Alaska, one time, and there was like some fucking whales came up to the boat. You know how big those motherfuckers are? Yeah, and the captain's like, oh, look, whales, maybe they'll come closer. All right, look, they were like those humpback ones, too, where, I don't know if you've ever read Moby Dick, but I know how the story ends. Yeah, you know what I mean? I know how that story ends. If Moby Dick out there decides to pull a Free Willy, we were all dead. Yeah, I don't... So, yeah, it's really easy for me to write about the ocean. But I try not to as much. But I have some more stuff coming out that kind of revolves around it. So I guess I'm getting...
what you would say is, one of your biggest fears would revolve around ocean life.
Oceans and insects. I don't like swarms of insects. That's another thing that really freaks me out. Like,
yeah, I think one of my biggest things would definitely be like, I mean, we both obviously have our own personal relationships with why we're afraid of the things we're afraid of, and while we're on this topic, if you're one of the listeners, go ahead and comment what you're afraid of, and maybe it might be a topic to come up later on. I don't know. But yeah, so a little shout out to the listeners. But I was thinking, my biggest, when people ever ask, what's your biggest fear? The first reaction I can think of is like, well, when it comes to like abusive relationships, that's what really fucks me up really, really, really hard is when I find somebody who's in a relationship that they feel trapped in and they can't get out of. That's like a legit fear of mine, and I know that I don't have to worry about that now because my girlfriend's pretty awesome. But she, I've been in a place where you go to work and they hate you because of how you act, and then you go back home and your wife hates you because of how the army treats you, and not just for you, but hates that you have to do your job. Actually, fun fact for our listeners out there. Jacob actually met my ex-wife at one point, and let me tell you really quick before he cuts in. So he drove across the country from Virginia to Colorado, surviving on bologna and cheese sandwiches. He came to...
We got fucking lost,
Joe. It took him like 5 days to get there.
It took us like 2. We drove
anyway,
through the night, but yeah, keep continuing.
Out all the time, like up all night for like 2 days straight. Got onto Fort Carson, which, by the way, the security on Fort Carson is like, who are you? And you're like, oh, I'm visiting a friend. And they're like, what kind of friend? And then he comes to my house, and this is something that we had planned out probably for a year, and it was finally happening.
Yeah.
He shows up on my doorstep. I answer it. I give him the tightest bro hug, and as soon as I finish, we turn around, and my wife at the time confronts him and his friend. I forgot who your friend was. I'm sorry, but
it's James. It's all good.
She confronts Jake, and she says, "What the fuck? Get the fuck out of my house! God damn it! I don't give a shit. Just leave." And I'm like, "The fuck are you talking about? He's like a bro." And she's like, "No, fuck him. Fuck you. Fuck everything in this town. He's not going to come into my house." And I'm like, "What the fuck?" And so then, trying to be the good husband I am and the best friend that I can be, I take Jake outside, and I'm like, I don't understand why she hates you so much, but this doesn't make sense. I'm really sorry. And I don't know what happened after that, but...
We went to the mall, and it was like the saddest thing, and James still talks about it to this day. I'm not gonna... Meeting your ex-wife scared James so much, I don't think he'll ever marry a woman.
Well, you should let him know that I lived with her I was married to her and with her and dating her for 7 years in total. So. Yeah,
because I just remember we went to we ended up going to that mall out in Colorado Springs.
You probably and
I think we got we just sat in the food court. Yeah, it wasn't. I mean, it was like that thing where we were just looking for stuff to do because we were out there. And it was really clear all the plans were derailed, and you were not going to have fun when you got home.
Yep.
And I just remember, and I'll never fucking forget this the day I die. We were like, I think you got spaghetti or something, and meatballs were like a couple dollars more, and it was something to do like your wife wouldn't let you spend the money.
Yeah.
Or something, and you were just like, And I just remember you like let out this sigh, and I was like, "Oh my god, Joe's gonna kill himself tonight." And James just looked like that was me and James. Like we were like, "Oh my god." Like, we don't know what to do. Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Like, the only time I've heard another, like, mammal sigh like that, it was my 54-year-old horse letting out a death rattle.
Yeah. I'm all happy-go-lucky now. I'm kind of like Buster Shrugs.
Yeah.
Where I'm like this happy-go-lucky guy, and, like, I'm not out to hurt anybody, but... You know, in the moment, like, don't let my nice demeanor fool you. I've seen a lot of shit, more than most people have seen in their whole lives. Even though at the time I was 25, I think.
Yeah, because I hadn't turned 21 yet, because you're a little bit older than me.
It was just funny, because, well, in hindsight it's funny. At the time it was miserable, but... Yeah, that was the same time that in my life that my parents were calling me once a week and asking me not to kill myself. Like, that was a regular thing. And they put me on high risk alert at work and everything. Like, I had the whole fucking thing. And there were a couple times where people were like, "Man, one of these days, you know, we're going to give Slater some shit. And he's going to go home, he's going to blow his goddamn brains out, and we're all going to feel bad about it." So people started being nice to me, and which was more insulting, actually. It was more insulting to me that they were pitying me. Which,
yeah, that's almost worse than just being mean.
Because, you know, it's just kind of a break from whatever shit. But anyways, yeah, so my biggest fear would probably say, like, toxic relationships where you become belittled as an emotional person. Like, you can't think for yourself, you know, that kind of shit. So that's why a lot of my characters are in mental states where, you know, they have a hard time thinking for themselves because of their environment. There's a couple of moments in the Vacation Planet. Sin specifically, the character Sin, she is in a weird place herself because she doesn't want to disappoint her father, but she's also in a position where she needs to rely on these people she's never known before. So, and in a city where she could get mutilated for being a tourist. So, yeah,
very nice, very nice. Yeah, I also want to point out though that when we were out there, Colorado Springs was a shithole.
Well, it depends on what part you're on.
We stayed at you were on base, so that's different. We stayed, and we ended up staying that one night at the Stagecoach Motel. Everyone was asking us for lighters, and then some guy tried to come into our room that night because he was like, "Nah, dude, it's cool. Like, I just need to sleep for a while." I was like, "Dude, get the fuck out of here."
If you can't,
like, I'm not letting you into my motel room.
Stand up for yourself in Colorado, people will walk all over you. So I think that's why I had a bigger attitude when I was out there. Since I've been in Maine, people are just a lot more docile and sheltered out here. So I've kind of toned it down a little bit since I've been home.
And I'll never forget that thing you told us too. We were, I think we were something to do with like people under an overpass. We're like, why is there people like hanging out down there? And you're like, they jack off in Doritos bags. And you just said it so nonchalantly. We're like,
that's because I saw it.
What?
Yeah, like I had told the story so many times at that point that I was so callous to just telling people that. So
yeah, you said it you said it like a person would say like, yeah, you know, it's warm out today. You're like, nah, they just jack off in Doritos bags. It's like, oh, okay, and they do, like, that's apparently a thing. The these like stoners and, you know, whatever else, people that like move there to get rich off a pot only to find out like that wasn't going to be a thing, just hanging under overpasses out in Colorado Springs and jack off in Doritos bags.
You were also in Colorado during the scare where people were putting AIDS needles in gas pumps. Like,
awesome. You know what else I remember too is there was a lot of, like, every business had a sign up that said not a dispensary.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. So if a building became vacant, it became a dispensary the next day. That's just a fact of life out there. Like, if it's going to be a dispensary the second you close. So
I heard they changed their laws around now because they were having a lot of problems. Like I remember because when we were out there, we were in the me and James were working in the funeral industry, and out there you don't need to have a license. So it's under a business license. You don't have to pass the board or anything like you have to in Virginia. So what we did out there is we were looking for jobs, and we actually found some. But the first question they would ask us when we were out there was, were we from California? And as soon as they realized we weren't from California, they'd actually talk to us.
Yeah.
And so that was really weird.
Yeah, that was actually something that, like people in California are more well known for being liberal-minded, and liberal-minded people are more likely to smoke. So we had tons of people coming from California and living in the area and making the property values go way high, so people couldn't afford to live there anymore. So that's why there was the prejudice there. I personally couldn't give less of a shit because I was living in a really shitty town, where because I had all of my teeth and didn't smoke meth with them, they thought I was a cop. So
were you in Pueblo?
I was not in Pueblo, but that's a really good fucking guess, actually. Pueblo is where I almost got stabbed by a bunch of dudes on a sidewalk picking up playing a fish date. That's a different story. But yeah, little white kid in a really sketchy neighborhood. All these Mexican dudes just stood up and they're like, hey man, can I help you out? You're like, nope, I don't need any help. Bye. So,
why did you just get her to meet you
she,
somewhere?
Didn't have a ride, and I was thirsty. So anyway, I mean, I'm going to call it what it is.
Makes sense.
So I, oh shit, I lost track of what I was saying. What was I saying just before that?
If you live in Pueblo, we're not shitting on it. We're just saying we're not stopping our cars when we drive through.
It's a pretty dirty neighborhood. I was living in Cimarron Hills, and there was like so many houses around me, and I was living in a complex where everyone around me smoked. And when I would get drunk, oh god, I hope he doesn't find this podcast, but when I would get drunk, I would bang on the wall, and for the rest of the night, you would hear them flush toilets and vacuum their floors all night. So
you're that asshole.
I was, especially when I was drinking, because I was like, well, my life sucks. So I had you ever seen the movie Death Wish? That was me. I was like, I don't give a fuck. I'm not gonna kill myself. I'm gonna let someone kill me though.
That being said, Manitou Springs,
oh yeah,
fucking
Manitou Springs
amazing.
was a beautiful place. Loved it. It's super hippie-ish, if that's your thing. Whatever.
Yeah, I almost bought a really sweet drug rug out there, but then I realized I had to drive all the way back across the country, and I was like, I'm gonna spend.
So Manitou Springs was pretty sweet, but my favorite part of town was honestly Old Colorado City, and that was just the town before Manitou Springs, and it was
we ate there at a cash only diner.
Out there. It was my first impression of Colorado in the daylight. Was staying in a motel at the base of one of those Rocky Mountain hills. And it was just gorgeous. And I think that was the moment I fell in love with Colorado. But, yeah.
It's a nice place.
Especially if you know how to get around and you know enough people there to get by. But,
yeah, I've heard all their like property and stuff's gone way up.
I'll never be able to move out there now. Because Maine income is Maine is like one of the poorest states in the U.S. So if we plan to move to another state, it's not going to happen on a good budget. So, Anyway, so that was, I mean, where do you see your horror going in the future? Like, what do you plan to do to invest in horror further? Do you just want to read more and write more, or is there something more than that?
I mean, obviously I want to read more. I actually just signed up for, I should get my first package this month from Nightworms. They're like a horror, fiction, what are those, like loot crates?
Oh, okay.
They're kind of like that. They send you like 3 or 4 horror books every month, and it's not mainstream. It's a lot of like small presses.
That's cool.
And stuff like that. So it's stuff usually I would already want to buy. Or authors I'm kind of interested in. So it's good stuff, and then it's like a lot of goodies too, like bookmarks and like coupons and shit like that. So I'm getting that. So obviously I want to find, more ways to help support other indies in this in the horror community. But on top of that too, I mean, I really just want to get more stuff out. Like, I have all these series that I just haven't gotten out there. That's like, and it really, I think, slows down my momentum when I finish a book and then just start another one, because in the back of my head, it's like, man, I got to get that other one out. Like, why is that not for sale right now? So yeah, I mean, I don't know. What about you?
Myself, I kind of want to broaden my horizons as far as authors go, because I've only really read a lot of, because I'm crazy about Lovecraft and Poe and King. Those are like my three. Those are like my three. My three kings right there is like the kings of horrors right there. But I need to give other people a chance too, which I have in the past. But it's difficult. I mean, there is a lot of material by non-famous horror writers out there. It's just I'm kind of critical about what I'm looking for when I'm reading something, because you'll be. It's easy to be betrayed by or even find someone who. The thing. All right, let me back up. So the thing that's struggling. Holy shit. The thing that is a struggle for me is finding a new horror author to follow, because what I like to call them is hungry authors. Is the hungry author is an author who's never published before, and their first book is just fucking gold. Just God, I love this fucking book. And then they kind of like get it all of out of their system with all that effort into that first book, and at that point they go, okay, well, I kind of know how the ropes go, and I'm just going to coast into the next one and the next one and the next one and get more books out there. I think their focus should be more on writing good stories. And sometimes I have a hard time finding something like that. So what I do, you suggested a few names to me before, but I mean, like...
I give you a whole list.
We probably do that if we're not, when we're not recording. But yeah, I think... To summarize, I kind of go down rabbit holes. I'm sorry. But I think overall, in a nutshell,
it's all good.
What I want to do is I want to grow as a horror name for myself, which involves creating my website, creating a presence, and reading more horror than just what I've gotten so far. You're probably gonna laugh, but I try to stay away from a ton of horror movies. Because if I watch a million horror movies, I tend to copy entire things and concepts. And I kind of want to go into it with a fresh mind for concepts and such. Like with Horns, I read Horns, and the concept was absolutely beautiful. I loved it. I loved the abilities that Iggy had in that story. But I was a little upset because I feel like there was all that potential, but... I feel like there was some wasted potential in what could have happened with the story. But, it's Joe Hill. He's a popular author. I'll probably get slandered for that, but, whatever. Everyone reads different stuff.
You're trying to start a beef with Joe Hill really hard.
But it keeps sounding that way. He keeps coming up.
I feel like you name drop him so much.
I hate it when people constantly...
Slater, we're writers, not 90s rappers. Like, you need to stop.
Yeah, I'll stop now. But yeah, I don't mean to point him out specifically, but I think you know what I mean. It's like there's like that one really good one, and then some phone can be coasted on. I'm
gonna be honest. I've only really seen his movies, but I've read Lock and Key. Let me take that back. I've read Lock and Key, and I really liked.
That's a compliment
I really
can't
like
throw
Lock
at
and
him.
Key.
Lock and Key was glorious. I loved it. It was a good series.
I mean, I liked the movie Horns. I haven't seen, what was that one that just came out or is coming out? The Fire.
Yeah.
The Fireman. Yeah, isn't that because that's based off his one book. It's like 401S or something.
The one that's a license plate.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I haven't read it yet. But that's mostly due to the fact that when it comes to me reading things, I'm cheap. Like, I'm gonna read whatever I can afford to read over like spending $20-$30 on one book, because I read too fast to do that, for that to make sense. And also, I don't like things. How do I put this? Because I write the same way, where I write the same type of things that I like to read. I just want to be entertained. I want that like brief escapism. I'm not trying to slog through somebody's literary masterpiece.
One thing that I've been told before, was really solid advice, was write the story you want to hear. Like, write the story that you would like to read about, and write it how you would want to listen to it, kind of thing. And I think that can go pretty far.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Because I think some people get really tied up into trying to write like the next great American novel, which is fine if you write literary fiction. But if you're a genre fiction writer, I mean, let's be honest, like it's, you know what I mean?
Right.
It's not going to happen. Now, you might write something that's super fucking interesting and super entertaining and everybody loves it and it'll win genre awards, and I think that should be more than enough. Because let's be honest, if you're making a living off your writing, you're doing good.
Yeah,
like, don't
complain.
I would
never complain. That's kind of my dream job. If my job, my actual literal job, was just to write 3 books a year, man, those books would get pumped out so goddamn quick.
Oh yeah.
I'd be like, okay, I'm not going to record for like a month or 2 because I'm working on a project. And then I'd be back and be like, wow, I'm exhausted. I guess I'll write the next one now.
Yeah, but everyone's, I don't want to show anyone because everyone's process is different. So, and I think it is too one of those things where, because I see a lot of people shitting all the time on like different authors because they've taken years and years to put out their next book.
You're not a machine. Like, who's it? George R.R. Martin. He takes a while to write them, but like he pointed out in an interview with himself and King, he's like, man, some days you just don't feel like writing at all. And you know what? I can totally understand that.
Well, and they're also at different points in their career. I mean, and it's the same with, there's another guy I really like, and I can't think of his name right now, but people are constantly like chasing him around on Twitter and social media and asking for the next book. And what I think a lot of it might be too, and I don't know this 100%, but they're also traditionally published, so it makes me wonder how many people have to look at all of their, every chapter they put in before anything gets approved. So I think when it comes to that type of stuff, especially for traditionally published authors, I kind of do wonder, because even of a traditional publisher, a lot of times, even on their submission guidelines, if you try to sell them a book, they say out like, whatever books they buy this year are for the next 2 years. So yeah, it's a weird place on the other side of the street, And I feel bad because I'm like, they probably can't say anything, because if they were like, if one of these authors was to be like, oh man, no, it's, all 5 of my editors, 30 beta readers, and so holding me up, then they probably just became hard to work with, quote unquote. But yeah, I guess that's this episode. We went on way too long, probably.
Yeah, right.
You know what? We're only 20 minutes over. You know what? For everyone that was complaining that our audio was too short, this is on you guys. I'm just kidding. I think we got into some really good stuff. I have no idea what we're going to talk about next episode, but rest assured it's going to be fucking interesting. As always, I'm Jacob, this is Joe, and we'll see you next week.